The great hall was silent. 10,000 seats rose in a circle around the central platform, and almost every seat was filled. Diplomats, warlords, scientists, and rulers from across the galaxy sat under the pale blue light and waited for the vote. Eldevaric's soul sat in his small chair near the back of the hall. His people, the Kavari, had been given seats far from the center. This was normal. The Kavari were not important. Their fleet had 40 ships. Their homeworld was small. Their bodies were small, too. Thin arms, soft gray fur, and large dark eyes that saw too much and felt even more. The Kavari were they could feel the emotions of others, like heat from a fire. And right now, sitting in that enormous hall, Varric felt something cold spreading through the room. It was indifference. It was the feeling of 10,000 powerful beings deciding that something did not matter. The something was a planet called Earth. The speaker of the a tall creature from the Delvani collective, with a voice like grinding stone, stood at the center of the platform and presented the facts. A small blue world, an unremarkable part of the galaxy, had been sending radio signals into space. The species living there called themselves humans. They were young. They had not yet left their own planet. They did not know that anyone else existed in the universe, and they did not know that a massive asteroid designated KX7741 was coming for them. The asteroid was large enough to end everything on that world. Every city, every forest, every creature that walked or swam or flew. The impact would come in 60 years. The humans had not yet seen it. By the time their technology was strong enough to detect it, it would be too late. The speaker asked the assembly a simple question. Should the Galactic Concord act to save them? The hegemony of SAR spoke first. Their ambassador was a broad armored figure with a voice to carry across the hall without effort. He said that the doctrine of natural selection was clear. Species that had not yet reached the stars were not to be contacted. They were not to be helped. The universe was vast and full of danger, and if a species could not survive on its own, then that was the natural order of things. Resources were limited. The Concord had its own problems. Let the asteroid fall. Authors agreed. The ruling courts of jail called the humans primitive and unstable. Their own surveillance reports showed a species that fought wars against itself, poisoned its own water, and could not agree on even the most basic things. Why spend time and energy on a world that would likely destroy itself anyway? The Devani collective said nothing for a long time, and then their representative simply said, "We see no strategic value." One by one, the great civilizations of the galaxy voted no. Varric sat in his chair and felt it all. He felt the boredom of the Delvani. He felt the cold calculation of Dar. He felt the dismissal of deep, and underneath all of it, like a sound too quiet for anyone else to hear, he felt something else. Something far away. He did not know if it was real, or if it was just his old mind playing tricks on him, but he thought he could feel them. The humans. Billions of small, bright lives burning on a blue world, completely unaware that the sky was falling. They were afraid of things. He could feel that. They were afraid of sickness, of loneliness, of the dark. But they also loved. They loved so strongly that it hurt him to feel it. They held their children the way Kovari held theirs, tightly, as if the universe might try to take them away. The universe was going to take them away. The speaker called for the final count. The vote was overwhelming. The Concord would not intervene. Earth would be left alone. Then the speaker asked as a matter of procedure if any delegation wished to register a dissenting vote. Varric stood up. The hall did not go quiet, because it was already quiet, but the quality of the silence changed. People turned to look at the small gray figure standing in the back row. Some of them did not even know who the Kavari were. A few delegates actually checked their data screens to find out. Varric walked down the long steps to the central platform. His legs ached. He was old, and the steps were built for creatures much larger than him, but he walked steadily. And when he reached the platform, he stood in the center of it and looked up at the thousands of faces watching him. "I have listened to every argument made today," he said. His voice was soft, but the hall systems carried it to every ear. "I have heard that this species is not worth saving. I have heard that they are primitive, that they are violent, that they are strategically irrelevant. I have heard all of this, and I understand the logic behind it. He paused. But we have looked upon that world. We have felt what they feel. They do not know what is coming for them. They sing and they grieve. And they hold their children the way we hold ours. If we turn away from this, then what are we? What is this Concord for? If not for this, he looked directly at the Tsar ambassador. We will not turn away. The Kavari vote to intervene. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the Tsar ambassador let out a sound that might have been a laugh. You have 40 ships, he said. What exactly do you plan to do? Whatever we can, Varric said. The laughter spread across the hall. It was not cruel laughter. Not exactly. It was the laughter of people who had already made up their minds and found the last objection funny rather than moving. The speaker restored order and informed Varric of the consequences. If the Kavari acted alone against the will of the Concord, they would lose their membership. Their trade agreements would be cancelled, their protection treaties would be void. They would be alone. Varric already knew this. He had discussed it with the council back home before he came. They had argued 4 days. Some had wept. In the end, the vote had been close, but the answer had been yes. We understand, Varric said. He walked back up the steps to his seat. The delegates around him were already turning away, already moving on to the next item on the agenda. The matter of Earth was settled as far as they were concerned. Varric sat down and closed his eyes. He reached out with his mind across the impossible distance toward that small blue world. Hold on, he thought. We are coming. 3 days later, the Kavari lost their seat in the Their trade lanes were severed. Their name was removed from the Alliance registry. 1 week after that, 40 Kavari ships left their home world and set course for a star system that most of the galaxy had already forgotten. They went anyway. Commander Lyon Thomas stood at the observation window of her ship and looked at the blue planet below. It was beautiful. She had seen many worlds in her life, but this one made her chest ache in a way she could not explain. Clouds moved across its surface like slow white rivers. Green and brown landmass sat between oceans so wide that they seemed impossible. And somewhere down there, billions of creatures lived their lives without any idea that a fleet of small gray aliens was watching over them. The Kavari had arrived in Earth's solar system 4 months ago. 40 ships. That was everything they had. Back home, their world was already feeling the effects of the Concord's punishment. Trade had stopped. Medicine shipments had been cancelled. Food imports had dried up. The Kavari homeworld was not a rich place, and without the Concord's trade network, things would get difficult very quickly. But that was a problem for later. Right now, Lyon had a much bigger problem floating in the darkness ahead of her. Asteroid KX-7741 was enormous. It was a rough, ugly thing, tumbling slowly through space on a path that would bring it directly into Earth in 56 years. When hit, everything on the surface would die. The oceans would boil. The sky would turn black. A species that had just learned to send voices through the air would be erased as if it had never existed. The Kavari were going to stop it. The plan was simple in theory and terrible in practice. The Kavari did not have weapons large enough to destroy the asteroid. They did not have engines powerful enough to push it. What they had was gravitational tethering, a technology that allowed a ship's core to create a small but steady gravitational pull on a nearby object. If enough ships held that pull for long enough, they could slowly change the asteroid's path, centimeter by centimeter, year by year. The problem was that gravitational tethering was never meant to be used this way. It was designed for moving cargo pods in orbit, not for pulling a mountain through space. The energy required would drain their ships to the breaking point. The radiation from the overworked cores would leak into the crew sections, and the work would take decades. Lyon explained all of this to her crew. She told them the truth. She told them that this would likely shorten their lives. She told them that their fur would gray early, that their hands would shake, that some of them might not survive at all. She told them that no one on Earth would ever know they were here. The Concord had surveillance probes in this system, and if the humans discovered the Kavari fleet, the Concord might take even harsher action. They would do this work in silence. They would save a world, and that world would never say thank you. When she finished speaking, She expected questions. She expected arguments. She expected at least some of her crew to ask to go home. Nobody asked to go home. The work began. It was slow. It was painful. The ship spread out around the asteroid in a careful formation, and one by one, they activated their gravitational tethers. The hum of the cores filled every corridor. The walls vibrated. The air tasted like metal. Lion watched the numbers on her screen. The asteroid moved. Not much. A fraction of a degree. But it moved. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. The crews rotated between ships, but there was no real escape from the radiation. It seeped into everything. The older crew members felt at first a tiredness that sleep could not fix, a weakness in the bones that no medicine could repair. Their fur turned white. Their eyes grew cloudy. Lion held the hand of the first crew member who died. His name was Torin, and he had been an engineer. He was 34 years old, which was young for a Kuvari. He died in his bunk, with his face turned toward the observation window, toward the blue planet he had never set foot on. They buried him in space. It was Kavari tradition to turn the dead toward the ones they had died for. Torin's body drifted slowly away from the ship, turning gently in the starlight, facing Earth. On Earth, things were changing, too. Dr. Maria Vasquez was an astronomer at a small observatory in Chile. She had been tracking KX 77414 for 3 years as part of a long-term survey project. The asteroid was well documented. Its path was well understood. Every model agreed that it would pass dangerously close to Earth in about 50 years. Though the exact risk level was still being debated, then the numbers started to change. It was small at first, a tiny difference in the asteroid's projected position. Maria ran her calculations again. She checked her instruments. She asked 2 colleagues to verify her data independently. The result was the same every time. KX 7741 was moving off course. Not by much. Not in any way that could be explained by no gravitational influences. It was as if something was gently pulling it aside. Maria published a paper. It caused a small storm in the astronomical community. Other teams confirmed her findings. The asteroid was indeed shifting, slowly but steadily. It was drifting away from its collision course with Earth's. Nobody could explain why. Some scientists proposed unknown gravitational bodies. Others suggested errors in the original trajectory models. A few, in less serious publications, suggested intervention by an unknown intelligence. These suggestions were laughed at. Maria did not laugh. She stayed up late at night, watching the numbers change, and she felt something she could not name. A feeling that someone was out there, that someone was doing something very difficult, very quietly for no reason she could understand. She was right, but she would never know it. The years continued to pass. The asteroid continued to shift, and the Kavari continued to die. 17 crew members in total. 17 bodies released into the dark, all of them facing Earth. Some were old. Some were young. One was a medic named Eri, who had joined the mission because she believed that healing was not limited to your own species. She was 29. Lion watched each one go. She recorded their names. She wrote letters to their families back home, knowing that the letters would take years to arrive, and that the families were already suffering from the poverty that the Concord sanctions had brought. After 23 years, the work was done. KX 7741 would pass safely beyond the moon's orbit. Earth would live. Lion stood at the observation window one last time. She was old now. Her fur was white, her hands shook, and her eyes were not as sharp as they had once been. But she could still see the blue planet below. Still beautiful. Still unaware. She activated her personal log and recorded a final message. This is Commander Lion Thomas of the Kavari Fleet. Our mission is complete. The asteroid has been redirected. The planet is safe. The species living there will never know what happened here. 17 of our people gave their lives for this world. I want their names to be remembered, even if no one on that planet ever speaks them. She listed the names. All 17. Then she sighed. They will never know we were here. That is acceptable. They are alive. That is enough. She closed the log. The fleet turned away from Earth, and began the long journey home. Behind them, 17 bodies floated in the dark, forever facing a blue world that did not know it had been saved. On Earth, the asteroid passed harmlessly by. Scientists celebrated. Papers were published. In time, the mystery of its shifting course became a footnote in astronomy textbooks, an interesting puzzle that was never quite solved. Maria Vasquez retired from her observatory many years later. On her last night, she pointed her telescope at the patch of sky where a KX 7741 had been, and sat in the quiet dark for a long time. "Thank you," she whispered to nobody in particular. In the silence of space, no one heard her, but the words were exactly right. Drini Yavish had a boring job, and he was fine with that. He was a data scholar for the Delvani Collective, assigned to the Department of Primitive Species Observation. His work involved watching undeveloped civilizations from a distance, recording their progress, and filing reports that almost nobody read. He had been monitoring 11 species across the galaxy for the past 60 years, and in that time, not one of them had done anything surprising. Humans were species 4419 in his database, a warm-blooded bipedal species on a medium-sized planet orbiting an average star. They had survived their asteroid event through what Dren's department officially classified as unexplained natural trajectory variance. Though everyone quietly understood what the Kavari had done, nobody talked about it. The Kavari had been erased from polite conversation the way one might stop mentioning a relative who had embarrassed the family. Dren's job was to watch Earth and predict what the humans would do next. Every 10 years, he updated his projection models. Every 10 years, the models said the same thing. Humanity would develop slowly, struggle with internal conflict, and reach basic interstellar capability in approximately 1,000 years. Maybe longer, maybe never. Then the models started being wrong. The first sign came about 100 red years after the asteroid event. Dren noticed a spike in energy output from the planet. He checked his instruments. The humans had achieved sustained nuclear fusion, not the dirty, explosive kind they have been playing with for decades. Clean fusion, stable, efficient. Dren adjusted his models. This was ahead of schedule, but not impossibly so. Some species had occasional bursts of progress. It would level off. It did not level off. 20 years later, the humans launched their first deep space probes. These were not the simple metal cans they had been throwing into their own solar system for the past century. These were fast, sophisticated, and aimed at nearby star systems. Dren updated his projections again. The new timeline said interstellar capability in 500 years. 10 years after that, the humans built their first warp engine. Dren stared at his screen for a very long time. Then he filed a report marked urgent. Nobody in the department had ever filed an urgent report. His supervisor called him and asked if he had made a mistake. He had not made a mistake. The humans had gone from radio signals to faster-than-light travel in less than 200 years. This was not supposed to be possible. Most species took 1,000 years. Some took 5,000. The Dhyani themselves had taken 3,000. And they were considered fast. Dan began watching more closely, and the more he watched, the less he understood. Human civilization did not develop the way other civilizations developed. Every species Dren had ever studied eventually unified under one government, one philosophy, one way of thinking. This was considered the natural path to stability. The humans did not do this. They remained fractured. They had dozens of governments, hundreds of languages, thousands of competing ideas about how to live. They argued constantly. They disagreed about everything, and yet they kept moving forward. They built ships that were ugly and impractical and held together with what appeared to be stubbornness and welding tape. But those ships worked. They built weapons that were crude by galactic standards, but terrifyingly creative in their design. They built medical technology that made Dren's colleagues stop and stare. Their soldiers carried poetry books. Their scientists played musical instruments. Their engineers painted pictures on the walls of their ships. They did not make sense. Nothing about them made sense. Dren filed report after report. He described a species that innovated not through order and logic, but through chaos and passion. He warned that every projection model was failing because the models were built on the assumption that intelligent species behaved rationally and humans did not behave rationally. They behaved emotionally. They acted on instinct and love and anger and hope. And somehow, against all logic, this worked. The Galactic Concord began to pay attention. The hegemony of Sar quietly increased their military patrols near human space. The ruling courts of Ja sent intelligence agents to observe human colonies. Everyone agreed that humanity was a problem, but nobody could agree on what kind of problem or what to do about it. And then everything changed. A human exploration vessel named the Wanderer was charting unknown systems in a remote arm of the galaxy when it detected a faint signal. The signal was old and weak, barely a whisper in the static of space. But the humans followed it because that was what humans did. They followed things. They opened doors. They looked under rocks. They could not leave a mystery alone. The signal led them to the Kavari homeworld. What they found broke their hearts. The Kavari civilization was dying. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly and quietly. The way a candle dies when there is no more wax to burn. Their cities were crumbling. Their fields were bare. Their hospitals had run out of medicine years ago. The Concord's sanctions had done what the Concord intended. They had made an example of the Kavari. 200 years of isolation had reduced a once gentle civilization to poverty and hunger. Captain Anna Meren of the Wanderer landed on the Kavari homeworld and walked through the streets of their capital city. The buildings had once been beautiful. Smooth curves and soft colors, designed by a people who valued beauty and kindness above all things. Now the walls were cracked. The colors had faded. Children with thin arms and large dark eyes watched her from doorways. Anna had seen poverty before. She had grown up in a mining colony on Mars, where nothing came easy. But this was different. These people had not failed. They had not made bad decisions. They had been punished. She could feel it in the way they looked at her. Not with anger or blame, but with a quiet dignity that made her throat tight. She requested a meeting with the Kavari elders. They received her in a small room with cracked windows and a table that had been polished so many times that the wood was thin as paper. They offered her water, even though Anna suspected they did not have much to spare. She sat with them and asked the question that had been forming in her mind since she landed. "What happened to you?" The elders looked at each other. For a long time, nobody spoke. Then the oldest of them, a female named Sona Verk, leaned forward. She was very old. Her fur was white, and her hands trembled, but her eyes were clear. "We will tell you," she said, "but you must understand, we did not do it for thanks. We did not do it expecting anything in return." And then she told the story. She told Anna about the Concord assembly, about her grandfather Varric's soul standing alone on the platform and saying that the Kavari would not turn away. She told her about the 40 ships that went to Earth. She told her about Commander Lyon Thomas and the decades of silent work, the gravitational tethers, the radiation, the slow dying. She told her about 17 Kavari who gave their lives to move an asteroid and who were buried in space facing Earth. She told her about the cost, the lost trade, the lost medicine, the slow collapse of everything the Kavari had built, 200 years of punishment for the crime of showing mercy to strangers. Anya listened to all of it. She did not interrupt. She did not ask questions. She just listened. And when Sona finished speaking, Anna sat very still for a long time. Then she cried. She cried the way humans cry. Not quietly, not with dignity, but with her whole body, with sounds that came from somewhere deep and raw. The Kavari elders watched her with wide eyes. They had never seen grief expressed so loudly, so physically on their world. Sorrow was a quiet thing held inside and shared through touch. Anna wiped her face and stood up. Her hands were shaking. "I need to call home," she said. She walked back to the Wanderer, sat in the captain's chair, and opened a channel to Earth. The message would take time to arrive, even at faster-than-light speeds, but she sent it anyway, and she marked it with the highest priority code available to a human captain. The message was short. "This is Captain Aina Marine. Of the Wanderer, I have found the Kavari. I have learned what they did for us. They saved Earth. They saved all of us, and they've been paying the price ever since. They need our help. Please, they need us now." The message crossed the stars and reached Earth. And when it did, the world that the Kovari had saved 200 years ago finally learned the truth. And nothing in the galaxy was ever the same again. The message from Captain Anna Marin reached Earth on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday, every person on the planet had heard the story. By Thursday, people were weeping in the streets. It spread the way fire spreads through dry grass. News networks played the message on repeat. Historians dug through old records and found the astronomical data, the asteroid that had shifted course, the papers that had been published, the mystery that had never been solved. Dr. Maria Vasquez had been dead for decades, but someone found her old research notes, and in the margins of one page, she had written a single word. Someone she had known. She had always known. The reaction was unlike anything in human history. Humans argued about everything. They always had. They argued about politics, religion, money, borders, food, music, and the proper way to make tea. They had spent their entire existence as a species disagreeing with each other about nearly every subject imaginable. But not this. Grand Admiral Kalin. Rohr was 53 years old and had spent 30 years in the United Human Fleet. She had fought pirates in the Al colonies. She had negotiated with hostile alien delegations. She had commanded ships through situations that should have killed her and somehow came out the other side. She was not a person who was easily shaken. The Kovari story shook her. She read Captain Marin's full report in her office at Fleet Command on Earth. She read it once, then read it again. Then she sat in her chair and stared at the wall for a long time. 17 people. 17 small, gentle, gray-furred people had died in the dark, so that Kellen's great-great-grandmother could live, so that her great-grandmother could be born, so that her grandmother could grow up, so that her mother could hold her as a baby, so that Kalen herself could exist. Every human alive owed their life to the Kovari. Every single one. The United Human Council called an emergency session. Every colony, every nation, every settlement with a voice in human governance was asked to vote on a single resolution. The resolution said, "The Kovari saved Earth. Earth will save the Kovari. Whatever it takes, however long it takes." The vote was unanimous. Not almost unanimous. Not mostly unanimous. Every single vote was yes. For the first time in the entire history of the human species, there was no dissent. Not one voice said no. Not one hand was raised in opposition. Grand Admiral Rohr was given command of the relief operation. She did not call it a mission. She called it what it was: a debt. The fleet that left Earth was enormous. Not warships. The warships went along as escorts. The core of the fleet was cargo ships loaded with food, medicine, building materials, and equipment. Engineering vessels with crews who could build anything from a hospital to a power grid. Agricultural transports carrying seeds and soil adapted for alien biospheres. Medical frigates with doctors who had spent the journey learning Kovari biology from the limited data available. 3,000 ships in total. It was the largest single mobilization in human history. And it was not for war. They arrived at the Kovari homeworld 6 weeks later. Elda Sonovarak stood at the landing field outside the capital and watched the sky fill with human ships. She had to lean on a cane to stay upright. Her granddaughter stood beside her, holding her arm. "Grandmother," the young woman whispered. "How many are there?" Sona could not answer. She had spent her entire life in a dying civilization. She had grown up hearing the story of her grandfather's choice and watching her world pay the price for it. She had never regretted it. No Kobadi deed. But she had accepted that the price would be paid forever, that no one would come, that the galaxy had forgotten them. The first human ship landed. Its doors opened and a tall woman in a gray uniform walked out. She had dark skin and short hair and eyes that looked like they had not slept in days. She walked directly to Sona and stopped. "Elder Varric," she said. "Yes, I'm Grand Admiral Kalen Rohr, United Human Fleet." She paused. Her jaw was tight, and Sona could feel the emotions coming off her in waves. Grief, anger, gratitude, and something fierce and hot that the Kovari did not have a word for. Humans called it determination. "We're here," Rook said, "and we're not leaving." The work began immediately. Humans were not like the Kovari. They were loud. They were messy. They moved too fast and talked too much. and bumped into things. They laughed at strange moments and swore when they dropped heavy objects. They played music while they worked loud, rhythmic music that the Kavari found startling at first and then slowly began to enjoy. Ti were also. It turned out extraordinarily good at building things. Within a week, the first new structures were going up in the capital. Human engineers worked alongside Kavari builders, and though they could barely communicate at first, they quickly developed a shared language of gestures and drawings and patient repetition. The humans learned that Kavari buildings curved because straight lines felt harsh to empathic senses. The Kavari learned that humans built fast because they could not stand to see people suffering while they worked slowly. Hospitals were the first priority. Human doctors set up emergency clinics and began treating Kavari patients for conditions that had gone untreated for decades. The medicine was not always a perfect match. Human drugs did not always work on Kavari biology, but the human medical teams adapted with a speed that amazed the Kavari healers. They tested, adjusted, failed, tried again, and kept going until they got it right. Food was next. Human agricultural teams analyzed Kavari soil and crops and began engineering new seed varieties that would grow faster and produce more. They built irrigation systems. They repaired farming equipment. They taught new techniques and learned old ones. Sona watched all of this from her window in the Elder Council building, which the humans had repaired in the first 3 days. She watched human construction crews raise new buildings. She watched human children because, yes, some of the ships had carried families playing in the streets with Kavari children. The human children were louder and rougher, and they ran instead of walked. But the Kavari children did not seem to mind. Children, Sona thought, were better at this than adults. One afternoon, a young human worker noticed Sona watching from her window. He climbed down from his scaffolding and walked over. He was covered in dust, and his hair was sticking up in several directions. He smiled at her at strange human expression that showed teeth, which Kavari found alarming until they learned it meant happiness, and held out a cup of something warm. "My great-grandmother was alive because of you," he said. "So was my grandmother. So was my mother. So am I. So, you know, thanks." Sona took the cup. She did not know what was in it, but it was warm, and the young man's emotions were so bright and sincere that she felt tears forming in her old eyes. "You are welcome," she said. He grinned wider, patted her gently on the shoulder. A human gesture she had learned meant affection, and jawed back to his scaffolding. The news of what was happening on the Kavari homeworld spread across the galaxy. The Concord watched with growing concern. Humanity was not just helping the Kavari, they were signing treaties with them, trade agreements, mutual defense pacts. The Kavari, who had been alone for 200 years, were suddenly under the protection of the fastest-growing military power in the galaxy. The hegemony of Sar sent a formal diplomatic communication to Earth. It was polite in the way that powerful nations are polite when they are issuing threats. It reminded humanity that the Kavari remained under Concord sanctions. It stated that interference with Concord decisions would have consequences. Grand Admiral Rohr read the message. She read it again. Then she sat down and wrote a reply that was 6 words long. "You left Earth to die. The Kavari didn't. Choose your next words carefully." The message was transmitted on an open channel. Every species in the galaxy heard it. In diplomatic circles, it was considered the most dangerous sentence ever spoken by a human official. Rohr did not care. She had walked through the streets of the Kavari capital. She had seen the cracked buildings, and the thin children, and the old people who should have had medicine decades ago. She had stood at a small memorial where the names of 17 Kavari were carved into stone. 17 people who had died so that Earth could live. She looked at those names every morning before she started her day. Whatever came next, humanity would be ready, and the Kavari would not stand alone. Not ever again. The war fleet of the hegemony of Sar was 600 ships strong. Each ship was massive, black, and angular, built for one purpose. And that purpose was violence. They moved through space in perfect formation, a wall of metal and fire aimed at a small corner of the galaxy that had dared to say no. Their target was Kavari space. Their orders were not to destroy, but to demonstrate. Visor wanted the universe to see what happened when someone defied the Concord. They would blockade the Kavari homeworld, disable the human ships in orbit, and force both species to accept the old order. It would be quick. It would be clean. It would be a lesson. The Saw War Council had calculated everything. They had studied the human fleet numbers, their weapons, their tactics. The humans were impressive for a young species, but they were still young. They had 3,000 ships, but most of those were cargo vessels and engineering transports. Their actual warships numbered in the hundreds against 600 SAR warships, each one carrying more firepower than an entire human battle group. The math was simple. The math was wrong. Grand Admiral Kaelin Rohr received word of the SAR fleet's approach while she was eating breakfast in the Kovari capital. She put down her fork, read the report twice, and then started making calls. She did not panic. She did not raise her voice. She simply began doing what humans do when someone threatens the people they love. Se. Pre. Pre. Within hours, the United Fleet was moving. Every warship in the sector burned toward the edge of Kovari space. Rook called Earth, and Earth called the colonies. The message went out to every human settlement in the galaxy. The Kovari are in danger. Come now. They came. They came from everywhere. Warships from the inner colonies, armed freighters from the border settlements, mining ships with welded-on weapons, colony transports that had no business being in a battle, but came anyway because their crews refused to stay behind. Research vessels, scout ships, a retired hospital ship crewed entirely by volunteers over the age of 60 who said they had lived their lives and were not afraid. They were not a proper fleet. They were a mess. They were humans. Rohr assembled them at the edge of Kovari space and waited. She had 1,200 combat-capable ships and another 2,000 support vessels. Against 600 SAR warships, she was outgunned by a wide margin. The SAR ships were bigger, better armed, and crewed by professional soldiers from a civilization that had been fighting wars since before humans learned to make fire. But Rohr had something the SAR did not expect. The first surprise came from behind a human line. A small fleet of ships appeared, 40 vessels, with smooth curves and soft colors. Calvare ships. They were old, barely functional, held together with repairs that human engineers had made in the past months. But they were there. The Kovari had come to stand beside the people who had come to stand beside them. The second surprise came an hour later. Another fleet dropped out of warp. 60 ships flying colors that the galaxy had not seen in centuries. The Tani, a species that the Concord had sanctioned 50 years ago for refusing to participate in a military campaign. They had been struggling ever since, and they had been watching what humanity did for the Kovari. Their commander sent a simple message. We remember what it is like to stand alone. You will not. Then came the Veng, a species of engineers who had been expelled from the Concord for sharing technology with underdeveloped worlds. 30 ships. Then the Arth, who had lost their seat on the Concord for protesting the treatment of refugee species. 22 ships. Then others, small fleets, single ships, species whose names most of the galaxy had forgotten. They came out of the dark one by one, and each one said the same thing in different words. We saw what the Kovari did. We saw what the humans did in return. We want to be part of that story. By the time the SAR fleet arrived at the edge of Kovari space, they did not find a small human fleet waiting for them. They found an alliance. Thousands of ships from dozens of species arranged in a line that stretched across the stars like a wall made of light. The SAR fleet commander was a veteran named Harth Voss. He had won 11 major engagements in his career. He had never lost. He looked at the fleet in front of him and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. It was not fear. It was doubt. He opened a communication channel. This is Fleet Commander Harth Voss of the Hegemony of SAR. You are in violation of Concord directives. Stand down and withdraw, or we will be forced to take action. The channel was silent for a moment. Then a human voice came through, calm, steady, and clear. Commander Boss, this is Grand Admiral Kaelin Rohr of the United Human Fleet. I want to tell you a story. Voss did not respond. Rohr continued anyway. 200 years ago, a species called the Kovari stood in front of your Concord and said they would not let Earth die. They were small. They had 40 ships. Everyone laughed at them. Everyone told them it was pointless. And your Concord punished them for it, took away their trade, their protection, everything. She paused. They went anyway. They flew to our solar system, and they spent 23 years pulling an asteroid off course to save a world they had never visited, full of people they had never met. 17 of them died doing it. They were buried in space, facing Earth, facing us. A species that didn't even know they existed. The channel was quiet. Every ship in both fleets was listening. When we found out what they did, every human alive agreed on one thing for the first time in our history. We said the Kavari would never stand alone again. And we meant it. We are not good at many things, Commander. We argue. We fight among ourselves. We make mistakes, but there is one thing we are very, very good at. Another pause. We do not forget. She let the silence sit for a moment. You can fire on us. Maybe you will win. Your ships are bigger, and your weapons are stronger. But I promise you this, every species in this galaxy is watching right now. Every single one. And they will remember what happens here today. They will remember what the Kavari did 200 years ago. And they will remember what you do in the next 5 minutes. And they will choose which story they want to be part of. She took a breath. So go ahead, Commander. The whole galaxy is watching. The channel closed. Erith Voss sat in his command chair and stared at the fleet in front of him. He was a military man. He understood power, strategy, and force. He could win this battle. His ships were superior. The combined fleet facing him was a patchwork of species and technologies that had no business fighting together. But Rohr was right. The galaxy was watching. If he fired, he would win the battle. But the story of the Kavari, the story of the humans who came to repay a debt, the story of the small and forgotten species who came out of the dark to stand together, that story would outlive any victory. It would spread to every world, every station, every ship in the galaxy, and the hegemony of Sar would be the villain of that story forever. Voss sat in his chair for 11 hours. His officers waited. His crews waited. The Alliance fleet waited. Nobody moved. Nobody fired. Then slowly, one by one, the Sar ships turned and withdrew. They left in silence. No threats, no final warnings. They simply turned and disappeared into the dark. The Alliance fleet held its position until the last Sar ship was gone. Then, across thousands of ships from dozens of species, a sound began to build. It started as a murmur and grew into something that the Kavari empaths felt like sunlight after a long winter. It was cheering. It was weeping. It was relief and joy and something fierce and unbreakable. In the weeks that followed, the galactic concord fractured. The old powers lost their grip on the alliance they had built through fear and control. A new coalition formed, not based on strength or territory, but on a simple idea that the Concord had forgotten long ago. You do not abandon the helpless. You do not punish kindness, and those who show mercy will find it returned in ways they never imagined. The Kavari were given a permanent seat in the new coalition. Their chair was placed next to humanity's. When the Kavari ambassador sat down for the first time, the human ambassador reached over and held her hand. The Kavari ambassador felt the human's emotions flooding through the touch. Warmth, gratitude, fierce protectiveness, and a love so strong it almost hurt. 6 months later, a memorial was built in orbit above the Kavari homeworld. It was a simple structure, 17 stone markers arranged in a circle, each one facing Earth. Each marker bore a name: Torin, Eri, and 15 others who had given everything for a world they never touched. Elder Sanavarik, very old now, and leaning heavily on her cane, was brought to the memorial for the dedication ceremony. A human delegation stood beside her in silence. She reached out and touched the nearest stone. It was smooth and cold under her fingers. She spoke the name carved into it. She spoke all 17 names, one by one, slowly and carefully. The way you speak, the names of people you do not want the universe to forget. When she finished, a human admiral, a young man with kind eyes, placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're here," he said simply. Sona looked past the memorial, past the ships, past the stars, to the small blue point of light in the distance that was Earth. She remembered her grandfather's words spoken 200 years ago in a council room where nobody listened.